Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the show. My name is Darren Brown. This is the California Dream and the weekly roundup for September 25th. So I've been away for a couple weeks. I had some personal stuff, some family stuff, and a lot has happened. So we have a lot to talk about today. Before we get started, I want to thank Michael Loebs for coming onto the show and the interview that he gave a few weeks ago. That episode is now the most popular episode in the history of the podcast, apart from the trailer. So congratulations to Michael on that. And also, congratulations on his performance in the recall election. It looks like he's on pace to receive about 25,000 votes from across the state. That's actually better than the bottom 25 candidates. So good results there, and let's look to build upon that in the future. Let's use this to build up registration for the California National Party, the CNP, which you can go to www.californianational.party to find out more about the party and registering for the party. I believe there's a certain number of registrations that we have to be officially recognized on ballots. So that should be a good goal to look forward to in the near future. Speaking of which, let's talk about the recall. So the recall came, the recall went, and as of right now, about 93% of the vote is in. And it's going down big, 62.5% to 37.5%. So that is 25 points, a 25-point margin, which is much larger than any of the pollsters had predicted. So I'm really happy about this result. Again, not because I'm a huge fan of Newsom, but I think it was really important to send a message, to have a wide margin of victory for a couple different reasons. So the first reason is just in terms of the kind of messaging that Larry Elder and a lot of the Trump base was putting out about this, that they were going to challenge the results, or they were going to claim that there was some kind of fraud in the election. And, you can do that when it's 5-10%, maybe. You can try and pull that crap, but with a 25% margin, it's really not tenable to do that. And so I'm really glad that the margin was this big, because it really doesn't allow any room for them to pull that kind of nonsense. And by the way, so Larry Elder was really pushing this just before the election. And he was really saying, they're going to rig this. There's going to be cheating. And I know this for certain. And then what happened when the results came in? Concedes, he just drops it, basically. So he knows he's lying. He knows this is just something that he's throwing out to the base just to get him riled up. And he's smart enough to know that there's nothing going on here. And this is something that I think is reflected in a lot of the GOP in California and the rest of the country, that there are some true believers, but a lot of these high-ranking Republicans, they know that they're saying a lot of lies. They know they're lying to their base. They know they're lying to the country. And they're just doing it for political advantage. They're just doing it to take advantage of the ignorance and gullibility of the people who vote for them. And normally you can get away with that, but Larry Elder decided maybe that was not a good strategy to use here. So that's one reason that I'm glad that it was such a wide margin. Another reason, of course, is, this ended up being a referendum, and I'll get into this later. This ended up being a referendum on kind of COVID policy and Trump and January 6th, and had more national connotations to it. And so this did get interpreted for better or worse. And I don't like that this is how it gets interpreted, but this did get interpreted as a rebuke of Republicans in general and the rest of the country, and Trump in particular, and his brand of politics. So I'm glad that it was a wide margin to say that, no, actually, it's not a close thing here. It's not that we're not some 50-50 state that's, about to go red. I sometimes read these conservative sites where they have this fantasy that somehow California is on the verge of going red, or it's tipping. There's some chance that's going to happen, and this really puts this to rest. That is not the case here, that the vast majority of the state stands against this type of politics and against this type of anti-democratic behavior. Okay, but the real thing I wanted to talk about with the recall is not just the results, but the reaction about the results, especially in the media. So I paid attention to the reaction to the results in the media, both within the state of California and nationally. So both online, so in the kind of newspapers, the major news agencies, and of course on cable television and YouTube and all that. And almost all of the coverage, I would say 95% at least, was interpreting this election as some kind of national referendum. What does it mean for the rest of the country? What does it mean for the Democrats outside of California? What does it mean for the midterms? What does it mean for 2024? What does it mean for this? What does it mean for that? Can we interpret what happened in California and say that it's something that has meaning somewhere else? There's really almost nothing about, hey, this is just a California election. Was there any talk about, the positions of the different candidates on issues that matter to Californians? Was there any discussion of all the crises that we're facing right now? I don't remember hearing much of any of it. This is what happens here. We find that our California officials that we elect end up having bigger aspirations for federal office, and they use California as this springboard to get to Washington. And all of our election results are always interpreted in terms of this wider conversation or this wider narrative about what's happening in the rest of the country. Well, maybe we don't care what's happening in the rest of the country for our own elections. I mean, if there's people outside California listening here, just to give you an idea, imagine you had a governor's election in your state, say, and all of the ads, all of the stuff before the election, all of the issues that people were talking about, and then after the election, all the interpretation of it, all of the talk about what does it mean, where do we go from here, everything. Imagine like 95% of that had absolutely nothing to do with your state. It just had to do with, what does this mean, outside of your state? What does this mean for the country? What does this mean for Democrats? What does this mean for Republicans? How would you feel about that? Would you be okay with that? Because that's basically what happened with this election. And that's going to continue into the future. If you want to stay inside the United States, be prepared to live with all of our politics, all of our elections, all of our election results only being interpreted through an American lens, only being interpreted through what does this mean for the National Democratic Party and the National Republican Party. If that's the way you want to talk about things, if that's the way you want to be interpreting results and discussing issues, well then, I guess that's fine for you, but that's not really what I want. And I don't think it's what most Californians want. All right, moving on to some other issues. I don't like to focus on what's going on nationally, what's going on in Washington, but sometimes, a lot of the time, most of the time, it seems like the behavior that's going on, the absolute absurdity of the situation I mean, I have to say something. I have to comment on it. So, how do you feel to be in America right now? You feel good about it? Let's run through some of the stuff going on right now. Let's run through some of this complete dysfunction in Washington. There is something that happened the past few weeks that received very little coverage at the time, but I talked about it. So if you remember, about a month or two ago, I talked about how the eviction moratorium had been kicked down the road, and I said, eventually they're going to have to make a decision on this. They're either going to have to keep kicking the can down the road, or they're going to have to do something to address this in a meaningful way, or they can just, do nothing about it, and they can just allow millions of people to be kicked out of their homes, continue to be kicked out of their homes. And let's see what happened. Well, it expired. Yes. So they did make a decision, and the decision was to do nothing, and millions of people are going to suffer, and that's just what happened. The Supreme Court stepped in and struck down the CDC eviction moratorium in late August, and that's where we are. Complete failure on that front. Also, on September 4th, federal unemployment benefits expired. So that puts a lot of people in a really bad situation. They were really relying on those benefits to get by. That's going to really hurt a lot of people. Now, this was unemployment benefit programs under the CARES Act that expired, and they failed again. So, end of the eviction moratorium, end of unemployment benefits, really hurting a lot of people, not much talk about it, no plan. This is what Washington, D.C. does. They don't have solutions for anything. Well, to be more accurate, I don't think they want to have a solution for this because they don't really represent working people. So it shouldn't be a surprise that they just let these two things expire. What else is new? More recently, we have these two infrastructure bills that are trying to work their way through the House and the Senate. Now, this is a really complicated topic that I could probably talk about for 15 or 20 minutes, but I'll make it really simple. I'll get to the basics on it. There are two bills that are going through. One of them is what's a so-called hard infrastructure bill, which is very limited. It's like just for roads and bridges and some other stuff, and very corporate friendly. It's a giveaway to a lot of corporations. And this is the so-called bipartisan bill. So it has some buy-in from Republicans. There is also Biden's $3.5 trillion infrastructure bill, also called so-called soft infrastructure. And this is the one that really includes a lot of the major components of his legislative agenda, what he's trying to push through. Really, this is his one chance to get stuff passed. And these two bills are working their way through, and what we're seeing is there's a gridlock within the Democratic Party because these moderate Democrats, so-called moderate Democrats, I call them Republicans, they are really digging in their heels and saying, no, we want just the hard infrastructure bill. We are not going to pass this $3.5 trillion bill because we think it's too expensive. We think it costs too much. It's doing too many things. It's helping too many people. And so they're digging in their heels there. And then there's the progressive wing of the party, Pramila Jayapal, who is leading a group of members of the House saying, no, we are not going to sign off on the hard infrastructure bill unless you bring both bills. And that means the $3.5 trillion soft infrastructure as well as the limited hard infrastructure bill. And if you don't bring both of them, then we are going to kill both of them. So to put it in simple terms, it's an enormous game of chicken. Both wings of the Democratic Party, the progressive wing of the Democratic Party and the corporate-friendly wing of the Democratic Party, the third way. They are staring each other down, and so far, neither of them has backed down. And there is a very real chance that this whole thing goes down in flames. This would be a big loss for the Biden administration. This is really his chance. And this is something about the federal system that is really messed up, that we have these presidential elections every 4 years, but the president really only has a few months to get his or her agenda through. And if you don't do it then, that's it. Because usually you're going to lose a lot of seats in the midterms. You've wasted your political capital. You just have to wait around for the next presidential election. So this is nuts by itself, just what I just described. But then we've got the structure of the Congress, the House and the Senate, really is geared towards the status quo. And this is something that's built into the constitutional system, that it is structurally biased toward the status quo. It's fundamentally a conservative constitutional system in that it's very difficult to get things through it. I mean, we're taught in school this is checks and balances and everything, but really there's so many checks and balances that it's very difficult to get major legislation passed. It's very difficult to do things. And it only takes a very motivated, organized minority, even a small minority, to stop anything from getting done. And that's really what we have now. The Republican Party is just completely just obstructionist and saying we're not going to go along with anything. And now we have basically the only two factions in the country that are really interested in governing, because the Republicans have given up on policy and governing a long time ago. It's really just the two wings of the Democratic Party now that are fighting it out. And they're in this big game of chicken. And we'll see what happens. We'll see if the progressives hold their ground. We'll see if they have a spine. It's coming up on Monday. The vote is on Monday. Maybe they'll approve a watered down version of the soft infrastructure. I hope not. I hope they stand their ground and stand up to some of these people on the right in the Democratic Party that really, in any other legislative body in the world, they would not be part of the Democratic Party. They would not be part of the so-called left-wing party. They would be in the Conservative Party. So, yeah, that's something that's happening. And if that wasn't enough, we are facing a government shutdown. We are facing a debt limit. Now, these are completely avoidable. As I explained in a previous episode, the debt limit, this is the economic, financial equivalent of shooting yourself in the foot. I mean, there's no reason for it at all. Both of these are being used as political weapons. And it's a sign of the state of the dysfunction in Washington, that things have gotten so bad that we have this on the table. I mean, it's hard to describe, for people outside of America, they must be looking at us like, what on earth is going on? You botched COVID. You really screwed the pooch on that one. You had what looked like an attempted coup after the election. And first of all, why do you have so many months in between the election and when you have the inauguration? You had this mob storm the Capitol, and you're really not doing anything about it. You're not holding anybody accountable. And now you have this new administration that's come in, and they can't even get their agenda through because the whole system is set up to stop anything from happening. So you have this game of chicken between the two wings of your party going on, and it looks like it's just going to go down in flames. And then you're putting a gun to your head and threatening to pull the trigger because of this debt limit and the government shutdown that could just, for no reason at all, just tank the whole world economy. What the fuck are you doing? What is this country doing? I don't even really, it's hard for me to have words to describe this. I mean, a year or two ago, if you had asked me to come up with some scenario, some fantasy scenario that I could make up as a story to write down about how bad things could get, how dysfunctional things could get, how far gone the country could become, I couldn't have made this up. It's beyond imagination, really. And we still haven't done anything about January 6th. And by the way, so there's some things that have come out the past week or two regarding January 6th. And I just want to say to all those people who, around the time that it was happening, those people on the so-called left or others who were downplaying it and saying, "Oh, you're being hysterical, you're being dramatic. This wasn't a real coup. This wasn't a real attempt. This wasn't serious. It wasn't organized. Things got a little out of control. I mean, this isn't like a coup that you would see in other countries." Well, yeah, it was still clownish, but what we've learned the last week or two is that it was planned. There was planning. There was definite planning put into process at the top of the Trump administration, steps to overturn the election, a free and fair election. A plan was put in place through a variety of legal and extra-legal shenanigans to bypass the election results and keep Trump in office. And, you know, that happened. And I'm sorry, the people who said from the beginning that we're making too big a deal about this, it's time to admit that you were being too sanguine about this. This was an attempt to overturn the election results. This was an attempt to overthrow the government. Stop pretending it wasn't. The fact that not only has nothing really been done to hold anyone responsible or accountable, and I mean the real people, not the people who drove in from Wichita, Kansas, you know, with their Trump signs, not those people, but the real people. The fact they haven't been held accountable, the fact that Trump now looks like the most likely Republican candidate for president, that we're even imagining a scenario where he's allowed to run again. It's beyond me. It's insane. I don't know if the last 5 or 6 years have just gradually desensitized everyone to what's going on, but we need to wake up to what's going on. America is in a really unstable place. As a democracy, as a federal republic, just as a functioning government that's able to claim legitimacy, it's hanging by a thread. Okay, I wanted to talk about some other things, but I ended up taking so much time on this stuff. I will get to that other stuff later. So I'll talk to you next week. Have a good week.